Despite a bumper wheat harvest, the number of food insecure people in Zimbabwe could double by the next harvest. As climate changes, some African countries that rely on grain imports like Senegal begin looking to indigenous grains like fonio that thrive in drier soil.
Hello and thanks for tuning into the show that goes around the continent to bring you stories near and far. I'm Chamberlain Osowa, Channels Television here in Abuja. I'm joined by Vincent Makori from Voice of America in Washington.
Thanks, I'm Vincent Makori at the Voice of America. Happy to be with you again for another edition of Africa 54. Let's start off with the latest from Nigeria. Chamberlain Osowa in Abuja brings you that story.
The economic community of West African states has been engaging various stakeholders in the electoral process on their roles in next year's general elections. It was held in Port Harcourt, the Rivers State capital, and designed to fill the polls of the political parties, the media, and civil society organizations to chart pathways for a smooth election in 2023.
This hall has representatives of the Independent National Electoral Commission's Inter-Party Advisory Council, security agencies and civil society organizations in Rivers State here for an engagement ahead of next year's elections. The event is at the instance of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, to further strengthen Nigeria's electoral system and participatory governance. Head of Democracy and Good Governance at ECOWAS says the body is mandated to have a response mechanism to any issues raised on their fact-finding mission.
One of the key elements that kept on coming out is what we decided to have a response mechanism to it. And that response mechanism to ECOWAS is a mandatory responsibility that the ECOWAS Protocol of Democracy and Good Governance mandates the Executive President of the ECOWAS Commission, His Excellency Dr. Toure, to give a response mechanism to once we get the report of the election fact-finding mission.
INEC head of voter education and publicity in the state highlights the efforts of the commission ahead of the elections.
We keep on based on the report of the foreign and local observers. We saw that the polling units are always very congested, and during election, management of elections will be so difficult and cumbersome. The commission decided to enlarge the voters' access to polling units.
For other stakeholders, the unique challenges faced in conducting elections in Rivers State should be identified and handled.
There's a lot of pockets of violence or criminality that is hiding in Rivers State. I don't know if any other person has been killing, false rivalry.
You don't need to be sensational. You don't need to take sides. You have to be neutral. You have to project all sides.
In appreciation of ECOWAS' interest in Nigeria's democracy, the participants promised to help realize the aspiration of free, fair, and credible elections in Rivers State.
Joining me now to discuss preparations towards the general elections next year is Executive Director of Kimpact, Election Monitoring and Rights Group, Mr. Bukola Idowu. Glad to have you on Africa 54. The 2023 elections are about 2 months away, and you can feel the energy and tension in the air. What do you make of the build-up to the election?
Well, I think the 2023 election is so unique that all actors, all stakeholders are really preparing for this election. And I think that is one of the things we have seen in terms of the tense atmosphere. Campaign is going on. And as you know, that this election is so unique in many fronts. Number one, this is the 7th election since we returned to democracy in 1999. Then number two, this election is going to be conducted with a new legal framework. And this is going to the general election with a new legal framework for the elections. Number three, you find out that this election is also unique in the sense that like about 14 resident electoral commissioners are relatively new to the system, and they will be going into the election for the first time as to conduct general elections. So, and again, you also look at the dynamics of the political parties. In the past, it has always been like maybe two horse race, but this time around we have other strong candidates and political parties coming up. So what we have seen is now that the election is so important to everybody. It's so important to INEC. It's so important to the political parties. And I think this is responsible for what we have seen. Again, this election is also so unique because we have also have a surge in registered voters. And this is also something that shows that, look, the citizens, most especially the young people, are also interested in this election. And that is why we have seen this momentum. And we have also seen a lot of activities around the elections.
Now, election observers and stakeholders have been echoing the dangers in vote buying and electoral violence. How prepared do you think the electoral umpire and other stakeholders in preventing this or bringing it down to the barest minimum?
Well, I think I take it in just two strands. Number one, the vote buying. Vote buying has been is not new because we started seeing that from Edo in 2016 to Anambra, and then coming back to Ondo, and then Ondo election, and Ekiti and Osun election. Now we are going into the general election, and for us, we have seen that this is not really going to be something that is not going to be a bit different. However, we may not see the usual commercialization of the votes in the polling units like we have been seeing in the past. And that is why we have been raising concern. And I think the INEC need to do more. The security agency, EFCC, ICPC, all hands must be on deck to curb vote buying. Because one of the things we have seen going on now is institutional vote buying. And by institutional vote buying, I mean where political parties and politicians go to associations and institutions to buy their vote ahead of the election. Now, if you also look at what is going on in terms of attack on INEC, and that is also something that is worrying. And we want to hope that the security agencies need to begin to do a bit of map out now and do more in terms of curbing and mitigating this electoral violence.
Given the security challenges, including attacks on INEC's facilities, what do you think needs to be done to improve security for these facilities?
Number one, it doesn't cost the federal government and it doesn't cost INEC to provide security to 774 offices of INEC across the country. That needs to be done as soon as possible. They need to have a standby security post there. That has to be done. And at the same time, one of the things we need to do now is that we need to make sure that most of the sensitive material are not deployed into these offices early enough, because destroying these is going to cause a lot of setback for INEC. And I think we need to really look into that now.
Just one more thing. Would you say you've been impressed with the political parties and their campaigns?
Well, I have been impressed with the rates they have been campaigning, but I am not really impressed about the content of their campaign. So in terms of moving around, in terms of the activity, yeah, they have been doing that. They have been going to states at the same time, but we want to see a more richer content in terms of their campaign messages.
All right, then, Mr. Bukola Ido, Executive Director of Kimpact, an election monitoring and rights group. Thank you for joining us on Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. After the break, with the Ethiopia-Tigray peace deal struck, grievances still linger. A need for aid and desire for justice for possible war crimes still plagues Tigray and beyond. Welcome back to Africa 54. I'm Vincent Makori in Washington. A peace deal to end Ethiopia's two-year civil war with Tigrayan forces was struck in November, but whether it will be honored remains to be seen. There is a desperate need for aid across much of Tigray, and on both sides, victims of possible war crimes are crying out for justice. Henry Wilkins reports for VOA from Ethiopia this year.
2020's Axum massacre saw Eritrean and Ethiopian troops carry out extrajudicial executions against civilians, indiscriminate shelling and widespread looting in the city in northern Tigray. Residents estimate hundreds were killed. Hiab Gebrusadik is a survivor.
The federal government is actually the perpetrator of the crime, and the criminals cannot investigate their own crime. Justice should come from free international organizations like the UN, the EU, the African Union.
Like many in Ethiopia, he wants justice for the suffering that he and his community endured during the country's two-year conflict. A peace deal was signed in South Africa in early November, and an end to the war may be in sight, but grievances stemming from possible war crimes remain. In September, a UN Commission of Inquiry on Ethiopia said starvation of civilians in Tigray was used by the government as a method of warfare, and that Ethiopian and Eritrean forces used sexual slavery against Tigrayan women and girls. Tigrayan forces, the UN said, didn't use the tactics but were accused of war crimes, including rape in areas they occupied in the Amhara and Afar regions. This woman from Lalibela, who asked to remain anonymous out of fear, says she was 7 months pregnant when Tigrayan soldiers came to her house and raped her.
They took me to a deserted area and raped me. They held me with them from Monday to Saturday. There was no administration, no police, and everyone left.
Although both sides have committed atrocities, the group Human Rights Watch says it has documented a sustained campaign of ethnic cleansing against Tigrayans, much of which has taken place in darkness because media and human rights investigators could not gain access to the Tigray region. And since the peace deal, the amount of aid being allowed to enter Tigray,
be it communications, electricity, banking, which are so critical to meeting the needs of the population as well, have not been restored by the federal government authorities. So we really are talking about a context in which abuses are ongoing.
Asked whether the deal is being implemented fast enough, one analyst told VOA,
"It's not entirely clear how much progress has been made in sort of deconflicting the front lines, this disengagement process. Again, this doesn't mean that the deal is about to collapse. It just demonstrates how hard this process is.
Even if a lasting peace is established, the road to accountability and reconciliation will be long. Tigrayan leaders have repeatedly said they wish to hold a referendum to leave the Ethiopian Federation. Henry Wilkins for VOA News.
A spiraling insurgency in Burkina Faso's north has forced the government to increase security spending, diverting funds from its arts and culture budgets in the process. Rust has almost erased the white-painted letter spelling program on a sign outside the sand-colored building that was only the one cinema in Burkina Faso's southwestern city of Bobo Dielousso. Take a look.
Film producer Drissa Touré peers nostalgically through locked glass doors, thinking back to a time when residents of the country's cultural capital could enjoy films from across the continent and beyond on the big screen. He reminisces on a golden era during which he socialized with African movie stars and spent time in the United States.
Concouru à la caméra d'or.
I competed for the Camera d'Or. My film was first selected at FESPACO in 1994 and in 1995, and it brought me to the Cannes Festival. The letter came here, and I showed it to my mother. I said, "Mom, this is like the Mecca of cinema. I am going to the Mecca of cinema in France." And there it was, the joy.
The once state-run Saint-Sagnon was relegated in 2020 to a National Social Security Fund, which ended film projections and rents the space out for more profitable uses, such as conferences and weddings.
Ce désir, ce besoin
That desire, that need to give the dream to people so they can grow in the field was cut off, and I didn't have anyone to support me, and that made me sick.
Heartbroken but not discouraged, Toure judged a week-long film festival at the start of this month that showcased a selection of African productions in a bid to revive local interest in the arts. The West Africa country hosts the renowned Pan-African Film Festival, FESPACO, in its capital, Ouagadougou, every 2 years. But the new festival is a first for residents of Bobo Dioulasso.
In the history of Burkina Faso cinema, you will see that many great names have come from Bobo Dioulasso. But there's never been this kind of festival to bring people together. A festival like this represents a moment of exchange, sharing, learning from the elders, and passing it on to a new generation.
It's time now for a short break, and as we do, we remind you to visit our website, channelstv.com, for news and programming around the clock. You can also find us at youtube.com/channelsweb. Still to come, renewed fighting in Democratic Republic of Congo's North Kivu region disrupts farming, leading to food shortages in Goma.
Welcome back to Africa 54. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. Despite a bumper wheat harvest, Zimbabwe's government says the number of people facing food insecurity in the country is growing fast. Authorities released figures showing the number of food insecure is set to double to 3.8 million by the next year harvest. Colombo's Mavunga reports from Buhera, Zimbabwe.
69-year-old Rosta Charuma is one of the food insecure Zimbabweans who need food assistance at least until her next harvest of corn and groundnuts in April. She lives with her husband and 3 grandchildren.
Here there is hunger, which is really painful. We eat once a day. We don't eat to fill our stomachs, but just to ensure that kids don't faint at school. They usually have porridge with no sugar, and they're used to it now. As for bread, I don't know when I last ate it.
Zimbabwean authorities have loaded a bumper harvest of wheat, a 13-month supply, which officials hope will lower the cost of bread. The price has risen to more than $1 since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But authorities in Buhera say investment must be in corn, the country's staple crop, instead of wheat.
I wish Zimbabwean leaders would look at Buhera district, which has erratic rainfalls, and introduce irrigation schemes. The community would have food security.
The UN World Food Programme in Zimbabwe says with funding from the USAID, it is importing maize from neighboring Zambia to rural districts and hopes the bumper wheat crop will lower inflation.
In rural areas, the communities are very much dependent on the consumption of maize. And the last agricultural season, unfortunately, the maize production, especially in those kind of rural communities, did not do so well because of the rains being very scattered during the season. So although the wheat harvest is great for the country, we do not really see, or we do not expect that it will be having a major impact on rural communities.
According to the latest World Bank report released in October, Zimbabwe has the highest food inflation rate in the world at around 350%. That is one reason why people like Rosta Charuma say they are no longer eating bread and are hoping corn production can help them survive. Locals say with a good irrigation plan, they can produce enough corn to sell and make enough money to buy bread and other food items. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Buhera, Zimbabwe.
Renewed fighting by the M23 rebel group has forced thousands to flee their homes, causing major disruption in the farming sector as well as cutting supply routes.
Sitting in the dirt, farmer Valerie Kahindo picks spoiled kernels from a sack of maize. The only job she can find in the eastern Congolese city of Goma after rebel fighters seized her fields and forced her to flee without her family. The mother of 8 is among over 250,000 people displaced in the latest offensive by the M23 rebel group.
Right now, I have nothing to do in the village. The M23 set up camp in my field. It is in my cornfield that they are based. They destroyed my field. They harvested and took all the harvest, so I have nothing now. And this is where I used to supply my maize. So I come to spend my time here. I hope God and the President of the Republic gets the road opened again and that the rebels leave my field. I will go back to cultivating corn immediately to continue supplying this factory.
She says her children, grandchildren, parents and siblings are stuck in rebel-occupied parts of Rushuru territory to the north of Goma, a key trading hub of almost 1 million people on the border with Rwanda.
My whole family is held hostage. They are not allowed to work at night, not even go to the fields. Our cultures have been sabotaged. It is by grace that we live. There is not even a way anyone can help them. My children, my parents, and my brothers and sisters suffer a lot from it. They call me day and night asking me for help. But I have no way that I can send them even 5 kilograms of flour. There is not even a road to deliver it. It is a misery that people live in Rushuru.
According to the Regional Business Association, since fighting surged in the province again in October, prices for everyday essentials such as maize, beans and charcoal have almost doubled because the violence has made roads impassable and forced farming cooperatives to close in Rushuru, which is the breadbasket of the province.
As climate change challenges food security, some African countries that have relied on grain imports like Senegal are looking to indigenous grains such as fonio that thrive in drier soil. Senegal celebrated an annual day of fonio to urge increased production of the nutritious grain. Annika Hammerschlag reports from Kédougou, Senegal.
Senegal's Kédougou region celebrates its annual Day of Fonio, a grain native to West Africa that's packed with nutrients like protein and amino acids. The region, on the border with Guinea and Mali, has become known as Senegal's Fonio hub.
The goal of this day is to raise awareness about the benefits of fonio and to encourage Senegalese people to adapt it into their diets.
Fonio is gluten-free, rich in iron, and grows easily without pesticides or chemical fertilizers. Most importantly, the grain is drought-resistant and thrives in poor soils.
Fonio isn't impacted by climate variations. We're never scared of drought or floods. We can always count on fonio. We always have a good harvest.
Food insecurity looms large in West Africa, where climate change is blamed for weather extremes that challenge food production. The need for tough local crops like fonio is at an all-time high. The COVID pandemic and Russia's war in Ukraine exposed the region's dependence on food imports like rice and wheat.
Now is the time to start thinking about how to stock up on reserves, for Africa and particularly for Senegal. Because if we don't, in 1 or 2 decades, I assure you that famine will destroy all of Africa.
Fonio production has been held back by the tiring shilling process, usually done by hand. Dehulling machines donated by the U.S. African Development Foundation have benefited Senegal's Kédougou region.
With the machine, we can process 150 kilos per hour, whereas manually, we can't even process 10 kilos per hour.
But other regions aren't so lucky. Senegal produced about 5,000 tons of fonio in 2019, compared to more than 500,000 tons in neighboring Guinea. Fonio fans in Senegal hope leaders prioritize the grain's production for food security and so it can reach its full potential. Annika Hammerschlag for VOA News, Kédougou, Senegal.
Well, and that's our show for today. You can find all the continent's top news and world news online at voaafrica.com. Check it out. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. Channels Television has our last word.
We look forward to bringing you another show next week. Remember, channelstv.com is your source for news and other programming. I'm Train Belinusor. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.